You're the only commissioner yet. Good afternoon, Commissioner McFadden.
Good afternoon. And good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Commissioner Pitts.
Good afternoon, Commissioner Robert. Um, and folks that are present, I know that we have a few presentations today, but I happen to care about how you all are doing. So if you could please put that in the chat, at least say good afternoon in the chat, and just let us know how you're doing. Be honest. And some of us can also put some words of affirmation and encouragement in the chat, because certainly I know that we all could use some of that today. So if we could just take maybe a minute or two in the chat to just say good afternoon. And if there is any positive affirmation, any positivity, words of affirmation that can support us individually, personally, or with the work that we're all doing, that would be appreciated right now. I certainly enjoy being with the teaching and learning team. So I'm happy to be here. And yes, we are excited about this snow. But as a teacher, I didn't get a snow day. We're all virtual, and that is the benefit of being remote, being virtual, still being able to meet the needs, the instructional needs, the social emotional needs of some of our young people. We're still able to have that connection with them. Christian, if I'm correct, if I saw the agenda correctly, we don't have anyone signed up for public comment, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Yes, the snow is finally melting. I moved my car earlier without slipping and sliding. So yes, we are grateful for that. And it seems like the city did a pretty good job with our major roads and our common ways. So that's nice. Let's get started with our agenda. I appreciate those of you that did enter some things in the chat and at least said good afternoon, because certainly we are a community um, of teachers and learners, right? So I appreciate those of us that put that in the chat. The first thing up is our ESOL curriculum review. So I'm not sure who will be taking the lead on that particular presentation, but I see Janice. Hello, Janice Slay.
Commissioner McFadden, how are you today?
I am blessed. How are you?
Great, doing wonderful. I got the chance yesterday to see two incredible lessons in a 4th grade and 8th grade classroom, where our teachers were beyond prepared, amazing, thoughtful, and our students and scholars were just impressive all the way. So it was a great day. So excited now today to bring you some updates around the work that the team has been doing. Just to refresh everyone, I'm Janice Lane, Executive Director of Teaching and Learning. And just want to remind folks that we bring curriculum to the board in a 5-year cycle. And this year is the year that we will be bringing forward our ESOL curriculum as well as our World and Classical Languages curriculum. And basically what that means is we share our scope and sequences, our executive summary, both with the board and with the public, and want to ensure that folks know, one, what is on our agenda, but also want folks to know the work that the team has done. I'm quite proud of really collecting feedback from users, from teachers, from our students, from the community, and really now thinking about this both in the virtual and face-to-face space and accommodations they've had to make in the reality of COVID. So both teams are here to present today. We'll be capturing notes. So if there's time for questions afterwards, or if there are responses that we need to get you after, I'm excited to do that and hear what you all have to say. So I will turn to Laura Ohanian, who I think will be starting off, and then turning to Maria. Or did I have that order the other way?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Janice. I think Maria's going to project. Let me introduce myself really quickly, and I'll have Maria introduce herself while she's getting ready to project, and we'll start. So my name is Laura Ohanian. I am Director of Differentiated Learning. I always say that's a little ambiguous, that title, but it affords me the ability to support the ESOL work, extended learning, and gifted and advanced programming. Maria, would you like to introduce yourself, and then if you can, project?
Absolutely. Maria Remore. I am the ESOL coordinator, which is not an ambiguous title, but I have had the privilege of working with City Schools ESOL for 22 years in one way or another. So I'm excited about that, and I will begin projecting now.
Great. While Maria gets the presentation up, so we already introduced ourselves, so we'll go to the next slide. So the next slide, we're going to be talking, just gives you a visual of the review cycle that Janice mentioned. This is documented in the curriculum policy and regulation. So in that policy and regulation, it talks about this cycle. And during the review process, the grade level scope and sequence and executive summary is shared with the board and the public. Next slide. So as noted, we have feedback is collected, changes are made, we have stakeholder engagement, we share the updates with the board, and then communicate any changes after that process. This particular ESOL review is focused on curriculum and content and the associated materials. I do want to remind everyone that we actually have an EL and ESOL update to the board. Our last written update was in May 2020, and our board update was provided a presentation in July 2020. Our next presentation will be in April 2021. That's the programmatic update. This is very much focused on the curriculum. I just wanted to make sure I remind everybody of that. So, so you're aware, we use the Wida language development standards. We're part of the Wida consortium. The state determines that. There's, I have lost track, but over 35 states that are part of the consortium. Our standards are very much dependent on the grade level standards. And so they therefore they align to the language component of a specific grade level standard. That's where that visual comes from, where you see our 5 language objectives are aligned to the content objectives for each of those grade levels. I think it's very important to note that. So as you look at our strategy and our curriculum, you are aware of that. Go to the next slide. So in general, our instructional approach and our curricular update will be focused around this, has really 3 prongs. It's our newcomer programming, which is targeted for students who have been in the country less than 1 year or have a proficiency of 1 to 1.7. And it's really looking at those grades 3 through 12. And when that classroom has made that sort of transition from learning to read to reading to learn, we are going a little more heavy in the newcomer instruction. We have the pre-K2 ESOL aligned by content, where we're utilizing both language and grade level content standards. And it's a variety of pull-out and co-teaching models, depending on what we refer to as low, medium, or high impact sites. That is populations that have small, medium-sized EL populations and large EL populations. That's a common terminology, but it's referred to as low, medium, and high impact. And then we have our middle and high school structures. These are often course-driven, include sheltered content courses. Those are courses that are delivering the content but have sheltered language instruction embedded, and often either co-taught or taught by a dual certified teacher. So for example, if it's a social studies class, a teacher who's certified in both ESOL and social studies, and academic language courses that focus on language and literacy aligned core content, like our ESOL English one. So I'm going to turn this over to Maria. I will be here, but she's going to take over from here.
Okay, as you can see here, we're starting off by talking about our elementary pre-K to 5 grades, and you can see that we have those broken down with the individual units. These units are aligned to the Wit and Wisdom units. From there, we move into the middle school units, and again, there is an alignment. These are the courses, the pre-K to 12 bands that are the ESOL courses, that second prong that Laura mentioned, where we're doing explicit English language development. And again, that might be pull-out, it might be co-teaching, it might be some push-in during small group time. Then we move into high school, where we have ESOL 1 through 4, which you can think of as loosely aligned to grade levels with and also a nod to proficiency level. Both things are taken into consideration. And again, the individual grade level, or excuse me, course units are listed. We have ESOL English 1 and 2, which are sheltered content courses, and this speaks to the specific programming that Laura noted in prong 3 around high school. These are courses that are taught by a dual certified teacher, and they are aligned to English 1 and 2 curriculum. So the question that overarches each individual module is the same. However, there may be a substitution of a different novel, or there may be a different an adjustment to a task, but ultimately they are seeking to answer the same module questions. And these two courses, as opposed to the other courses we noted, which are considered ESOL courses at the high school level, these actually satisfy the requirement for 9th and 10th grade English. Newcomer units, as we noted, are broken down by grade band. Grades 3 to 5 and 6 to 8 follow this progression of units. The materials are slightly different, but the units are the same. When we get to the academic language units, those are a little bit different, and we have 4 courses that are available at both middle and high school that target the content language for each of the 4 core academic subjects. So basic literacy, language of math, language of science, and language of social studies. And these are the units that are associated with each of those core classes. Finally, we have a number of additional educational resources. These come from multiple sources. Some are funded out of Title III, especially this year. Some have been funded out of some of the CARES Act money. But specifically, we have them broken down here, and you can see there's support around speaking, listening, literacy, as well as content language support. And the different resources that are available are noted under those different categories in order to focus in as an additional support for those particular skills. This year, we've seen a number of adjustments to our practice as a result of the virtual learning and our response to the current circumstances surrounding the pandemic. Supports that have been put in place include a number of those additional things that we noted on the prior slide. with a specific eye towards focusing on oral language, speaking and listening, because that has shown itself to be particularly difficult to address during our virtual learning period. So we have spent a good bit of time investing in supports for that, and that includes things like the headsets and the platforms, Extempore and Nearpod, for example, that we're using those with. In terms of our focused recovery, we are looking at implementation once kids return to classes of an assessment, a formative assessment called the Model Online. It is directly aligned to the access assessment that is given to all ELs every year as part of MCAP testing. But what it does is, rather than waiting on the scores to come back for the access assessment, this is a real-time assessment that we can give that gives us proficiency levels for speaking, listening, reading, and writing that will allow us to pick back up with targeted instruction and intervention where students have the greatest need. Additionally, we're looking at some targeted and significantly expanded summer programming at all grade levels, elementary, middle, and high. And finally, leveraging some other additional resources to have expanded newcomer materials available for when we have students back in classrooms. In terms of our professional development around the curriculum and the work that our teachers do with it, we this year implemented a partnership with the Center for Applied Linguistics to train 60 high school teachers and administrators on how to differentiate for ELs and content areas. We're utilizing the SIOP model, which is Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. In addition to training these 60 folks, we will also run a Trainer of Trainers module over the summer so that we can build internal capacity. We have Title I initiatives at 11 schools where we have a dedicated staff member, an educational associate, who attends biweekly PLCs and provides direct support to those schools. We have a number of teacher PLCs, biweekly, led by teachers. Systemic PD, full-day systemic PD that targets ESOL teachers and our bilingual staff. In addition, there is monthly synchronous and asynchronous PD for both ESOL and content teachers and the bilingual staff as well. This year in particular, we have focused on that comprehensible input piece, that language production, oral language that's been such a struggle during virtual learning. And finally, all of our educational associates have office hours that are open and available to anyone who needs support: school leaders, ESOL teachers, content teachers, really any school staff. Looking at our curriculum feedback and the development piece, we have consistently taken a very collaborative approach to curriculum development, with feedback being actively solicited from our teachers. They're encouraged to engage in the feedback process, but also in the revision process. And we have attempted to be as responsive as we possibly can to that feedback. One of the things that has come of that is our increased alignment to the ELA curriculum. Additionally, the continuous support that's available to teachers via our educational associates helps with the implementation of the curriculum. In terms of family engagement, we have a number of different avenues where we've looked at family engagement around our curriculum. We have regular family communication via our progress reports, parent-teacher conferences, a multitude of different types of regular communication. In addition, we have an engagement workshop series that's specifically designed for the parents and families of English learners. It covers topics that are very specific to English learners and their education that we wouldn't necessarily think about for non-ELs, including information about the structure of U.S. schools, what ESOL instruction looks like, and what the curriculum looks like. They are currently being offered weekly in a different language. We have a topic for each month, and each week in that month, a different language group is targeted with that content. Currently, we are running these workshops in Spanish, French, Swahili, Arabic, and Tigrinya, which are our largest language groups at this time. Here you can see a couple of pieces of feedback that have been pulled from the different things we've heard from the various folks who have engaged in our feedback. We did conduct a survey that was live for about 4 weeks that solicited impact from teachers, school leaders. We also talked to some students and pulled some of this from that feedback. One thing that I think was particularly impactful for us was when we got a response from a school leader saying that the wit and wisdom aligned materials, especially the end of module task differentiation, they find to be the most useful because it helps teachers scaffold and differentiate within the general education curriculum. But again, we take all of this feedback and use it to inform any changes that we need to make. So as we look at what we've done so far and how we're moving forward, we can see that we've made some significant steps, and you can see those there in terms of instituting quarterly formative writing assessments. There's significantly improved and increased use of teacher resources, the ELA alignment that I mentioned earlier, school supports with the different professional development initiatives. However, we know there's more that needs to come, and as we look ahead, we're looking at expanding the newcomer programming for those grade bands in 3 to 12. We will be revising the ESOL English 1 and 2 curricula to align once new English 1 and 2 curricula is adopted by the district. We're also exploring potential district adoptions of additional materials, new materials for working with English language development. Finally, we are in the process of working through a strategic plan around our multilingual community and our English learners. It began about a year ago, and really we started to dig in the summer of 2020 and will continue through this spring. We've looked at a data review of district and staff data. We're trying to build on what's working and look at that and for a starting point. We've done a lot of work engaging with staff via surveys, design team, we have a guiding coalition, and then also engagement families utilizing the structures we already have in place for engaging families with the workshop series I mentioned previously. We're also working to consult with various experts in the field. We've done a lot of work and we're working hand in hand now with the Council of Great City Schools to help us with connecting with some other districts as well. The final plan should be presented by the end of the school year. So with that, any questions?
Thank you for that, Commissioner Roberts.
Thank you, Commissioner McFadden, and thank you so much for the presentation. My question kind of builds off of one of your last points of building on what's working. We know that a couple months ago, we continued a procurement with Language Link to provide additional services or to scale the capacity that we could accommodate our ESOL students and their families. Could you speak to how that effort has assisted with in the virtual/hybrid experience for the students in terms of curriculum for ESOL students?
Yep, I'll try to take a stab at this and then move it over to Maria. I think just to remind everyone, the Language Link is not just for our EL students and their families, it's also for there are a number of families whose students might not be ELs, whose parents still require the language support. It's actually more of like a Venn diagram than, two circles on top of each other, because we've a number of kids who may have exited service or never, sometimes we have younger siblings who never qualify for service because they might have older siblings. So just and what we found was we did have an uptick of the use of Language Link. I think it was a combination of this virtual platform. We're not in buildings with families, right? And we're trying to communicate. And so we've been using, which is great, right? It's great that we're using these resources. I think it's a combination of that and the rapid growth we saw. I think we saw close to a 30% increase last year in the population of our English learners. So it's a combination of things. And what we're finding is that staff are using these resources. They know they're available. There's always more work to be done with that, but we find that they're very helpful. Instructionally, mostly to keep families informed about what's happening with their students more than in the instructional setting, we're really focused on sort of, we don't use that with our students. Rather, we use sort of scaffolds to scaffold back. We might use visuals, we might use other modes with the students, but with the parents, it's particularly effective in communicating with them about how their students are progressing and the supports they can provide at home. That's the instructional lens. I don't know if I answered your question, Commissioner Roberts. I hope I did.
You did. Thank you so much.
Commissioner Roberts, anything else?
No, just thank you so much for the presentation and the update.
Yeah, thank you for this. I know that this is, it's extensive work, right? To think about curriculum. I'm writing some curriculum nationally at this point, in addition to for, of course, my school system. I'm curious though, the school system that I work for. I'm curious to know a little bit more about in the scope and sequences. Would it be appropriate to list some strategies for special education students? Would that be appropriate to go in the scope and sequence, or would that be identified in some of the unit plans?
That's Commissioner McKenna, I just want to clarify, you mean for kids who are dual identified, both special education and ESOL?
Perhaps, yes.
Okay.
We are servicing, right? Yes, students who are receiving ESOL.
Oh yeah, we do have a group of students who have both. I think that's probably something we should have noted in our looking ahead as more growth to do. We do a lot of work with our kids that are dual identified. We have one lead person on our team who focuses on that work. And the way we've approached it up until this point is really separate from the curriculum, and more at the individual student level, looking at their IEP and then also their EL plan. So we have for every student a differentiated strategies form that identifies strategies and scaffolds that the teacher can use. And we have somebody with a special education background who works with schools who need additional support with those students. That is probably the most complex group to work with, to be honest with you. You're hitting on a really important point. And really differentiating and being able to tease out what components are linguistic,
Yep.
what components are linked to the disabilities.
Yep.
So it tends to come out not so much in the curriculum, but more in our differentiated strategies form that we've used for every student. And we offer to have somebody at the table during the IEP discussion that has a background in both special education and ESOL that can help the team identify strategies for kids. I don't know if that's answers your question.
It's close, but what if there is a student that perhaps is newly identified in a teacher's class that may not have a bulk of experience differentiating at the level that perhaps the student may need that? Are there any supports in place that can support that teacher and that student, of course, and the family within the scope and sequence, or would it be in one of those other the differentiated forms that you mentioned, or would there be some sort of strategies listed in the unit plan? And I'm saying this for both this and the world languages. I'm interested, and I know that Janice is still with us, I'm interested in seeing unit plans as well, perhaps maybe for grades 3, 5, and 8. I just want to see how the units are rolled out, because I know that there are suggested weeks for each of the different modules. So I see that is present. Me as a teacher, it would be helpful to see what those units look like and how they should be rolled out within those weeks. I know that wouldn't necessarily be included in the scope and sequence or in the executive summary, but I would like to see those for both ESOL and for world languages. But I'm going back to what I was mentioning. Would it be helpful to have some sort of something in the scope and sequence to kind of coach some teachers through, maybe with less experience and some that may be a bit more? expensive. I hope I'm making sense in what I'm asking.
No, I mean, you're making a lot of sense. One of the things I can say, and then I'm going to turn it over to Maria. I'm just going to try to start it, and then I'm going to turn it over to Maria. And I'm going to apologize because I have to jump at 4 to present to principals, to all the principals separately. But let me start it, and then I'll move it to Maria. It's one of the things that we do is differentiate our sort of support to students based on their proficiency, which in some ways gives us an advantage in how we approach differentiating for the students. And the curriculum that we've identified here is really targeted to our ESOL teachers. We additionally have our ESOL EAs that support all of our schools and are go in with our teachers and will help them sort of identify the student, the support, and the needs they have. In some ways, ESOL, I always talk about ESOL, in some ways is like special education and in some ways is not. We have core curriculum, which is what we're talking about today. We also have supports that we provide our students, and we provide a combination of that in a combination of core curriculum and support in supporting all of our students. So it's sort of how we approach our work is driven by what the needs of the kids are, if that makes sense. But I'll turn it over to Maria to talk a little bit more about the EL plan. And I'm going to apologize in advance that I have to go and present to all the principals. But I will come back, and if there's any questions that you need me for, I'll make sure I respond to you in writing. So I apologize.
That, Laura, and just before you go, I just know that with, our English language learners being a population of our students that is, growing, I just want to make sure that what you just said is being packaged in a way that will be able to support the work as we move forward, as we know that this is a growing population. To make sure that our teachers are prepared and our school leaders are prepared to manage the work. That's all.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I think our EL strategy work speaks a lot to that we'll be bringing to you in April.
Perfect.
So I'm excited about that. But I'll turn it over to Maria. Thank you so much, always, for your thoughtful questions and allowing us to present.
Have fun.
The only real piece I would add would be to expand a bit on the EL plan. As Laura noted, the curriculum that we presented here is the curriculum for the ESOL teachers who are teaching the explicit language development piece. We do try to work with the content teachers around how they can provide those supports, and we are definitely communicating with our colleagues in teaching and learning around their contents and how we can provide those supports. One of the ways that support is provided is through the EL plan. There are some very specific pieces that have to be a part of it from an accountability standpoint, but then other pieces of the EL plan, and each English learner has one, are things that we have developed. And one of the things that we've done at a district level is every English learner, as a part of their EL plan, has a very specific document developed every year that is based on the scaffolds they need. And those are the scaffolds they need in their content classes, not in their English language development classes. And we work with the content teachers to develop that for every English learner, so that those teachers who have the students in math or science or art know what those supports and scaffolds are that individual child needs.
I know those quite well because I get something similar with several of my students also. So I appreciate that. And I don't want to linger there because I know that more of this is going to be presented in April, but I would like to see some of those units if possible. Because I'd like to review those also. I know that we get the scope, the sequence, the executive summaries, but I know that some things are just outlined in a bit more detail in those unit plans. And I'd just like to have my eyes on them, particularly if I could see grades 3, 5, and 8. I'm interested in that. And then I'm curious also with the feedback that was received from teachers and students and families and all of that. Did we target teachers for feedback and revision, or was it just open, right? Open for feedback. Did you open it to all of our ESOL teachers, or did we specifically look at geographical locations, or maybe some schools that have a history of strong ESOL programs versus some that may have new programs or some that may be struggling? did we target our reception of feedback, or did we just leave it open? And I'm saying that because clearly, if we targeted it, I think that some of the data that comes back perhaps could be a bit more efficient, perhaps. But I don't know. That's why I'm asking the question.
There are two pieces to that. It was open to anyone, but we made a specific effort to target certain groups and schools to get their feedback, knowing that there are certain schools, for example, that are more heavily impacted by newcomers or more heavily impacted by students with limited first language schooling. So while it was open to everyone, we made a concentrated effort to get more feedback from specific sites, and certain things that we adjusted were a direct reflection of that. So for example, the tighter alignment to English language arts, looking towards expanded resources for newcomers, those things were specifically coming out of those targeted conversations.
Perfect. Great. I appreciate that. Commissioner Roberts, do you have anything else?
I do not.
And I know because Janice, our ED, is on, I didn't know if you had anything else before we went to the world language presentation.
The only point that I would add, Commissioner McFadden, is that the ESOL department and teachers have been really stepping into a leadership role of bringing students back face to face. So when you talked about targeted teachers, we've been able to learn from them in the process of what worked as they've been working with face to face with students. The reason Laura went to talk to our principals, and we had some teachers who have stepped up and did professional development for us last week to share best practices. So really trying to elevate both that continuous improvement lens of what's working that we can expand and share across the district, and then really utilizing our teachers that are experts, and just want to say thank you to those teachers and the leadership team in ESOL that has stepped up to really support that work ongoing. Also understand your point exactly. I think I just put in the chat that you were highlighting those educative features, or really knowing what supports are for teachers within the units to help in this transition over time. And as I think, both Maria and Laura hit, there are some built into that, but work that we're continuing to refine that we'll be bringing back to you as our full strategy. So excited for the alignment and for the next steps.
Perfect.
Great.
Thanks.
And no problem. I don't need to do much framing for world and classical languages because it's on the same framework around that review. So John Neubauer, our coordinator, is here with us, as well as Kelly Gonzalez, our director of that work. So I think I'm turning to John Neubauer now.
Great.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Janice. Okay. Janice, have you shared?
I shared basically, I know you had a little trouble getting on, John. I shared just the initial frame of the 5-year review and why we're here, so you can just jump right into your presentation.
Perfect.
Thanks so much.
Okay. So I'm going to skip the overview that Janice gave. So during the session, I'm going to provide a general overview of the curriculum as it currently stands. And in doing so, we're going to examine the driving force behind its creation, namely its alignment to the Maryland World Readiness Standards for Learning Languages, its alignment to the ACTFL can-do statements, and its alignment to the Advanced Placement Language and Culture examination. And just as a reminder, these were the components that were presented and approved during the last curriculum review for world languages in May of 2015. In addition, we will examine today the work that has occurred since the last review, namely the development of assessments and professional development opportunities that support the implementation of the curriculum. And then finally, we will examine some future work here today. So the world language curriculum is a performance and proficiency-based curriculum. It's designed to develop learners' communication and intercultural competency skills. The skills and the competencies prepare students to interact with people in our nation and around the world, as well as interpret and use information from global sources. The curriculum, as I mentioned before, is aligned to the Maryland World Readiness Standards for Learning Languages, and it's organized around the 3 modes of communication that you see here on the screen: the interpersonal mode, the presentational mode, and the interpretive mode. And then it's further organized around 5 groups of learning objectives. Once again, interpersonal speaking and listening, which you see at the top. You have interpretive listening and interpretive reading. You have presentational speaking and presentational writing. These learning objectives identify what students should know and be able to do, ergo their proficiency level, across the 3 modes of communication as identified by the Maryland World Readiness Standards. Here, the curriculum is, you can see that the curriculum, once again, is further organized by proficiency level. And once again, this is identified for us in the Maryland World Readiness Standards of Language Learning. And the chart that you see here illustrates the exit proficiency expectations for the various levels. And once again, working with the Maryland State Department of Education, we as a group set these levels. So, students exiting level 1 should have a proficiency level of novice mid and novice high. Students exiting level 2 should have a proficiency level of novice high intermediate. And please note here that interpretive listening is always 1 proficiency level higher than the other modes and skills. And in language learning, one is able to often understand more than one is able to produce. Should a student wish to continue with language study, the expectation is then that at level 3, the student would exit at an intermediate low, intermediate mid level of proficiency. And at level 4, which is basically our AP class, students would exit at an intermediate, mid, intermediate, high level of proficiency. In this chart, we are able to see in greater detail the exit proficiency expectations or the performance descriptors for each level of proficiency that was previously discussed. The performance descriptors describe how well learners are able to use the language as they improve their performance from the various levels of proficiency. And in the development of the curriculum, the performance descriptors were used to form a roadmap, if you will, for teaching and learning in a standards-based, performance-oriented learning environment. And by doing so, the performance descriptors help language educators create performance tasks that are targeted to appropriate performance ranges. And the descriptors also help educators set realistic expectations at the summative assessment level. Another important factor in designing the curriculum was the incorporation of the actual can-do statements. And the can-do statements are a result of a collaboration between the National Council of State Supervisors for Languages and the American Council of the Teaching of Foreign Languages. And the can-do statements allow language learners, first of all, to identify and set learning goals and chart their progress towards language and intercultural proficiency. They also allow for educators to write communication learning targets for unit and lesson plans, and they allow for stakeholders to clarify how well learners at different stages can communicate. Simply put, the can-do statements are a checklist that are used in classrooms to assess what students can do with language in the various modes of communication. Once again, when developing the curriculum, the can-do statements were used as a roadmap to help guide teachers, if you will. We're going to examine the can-do statements a little further on when we look at assessments. Finally, the third most important factor in designing the world language curriculum was its alignment to the advanced placement exam for language and culture. In the development of the current curriculum that we have, it's important to note that the curriculum was conceptualized using a backward design model, beginning with advanced placement themes. Because successful completion of AP has long been considered a reliable measure of mastery by world language teachers and others for very good reasons. An AP course offers students the opportunity to participate in college-level learning experiences and receive credit according to their degree of success. So with that in mind, the expected outcome of the curriculum design is that through intentional planning and supportive implementation of curriculum designed with rigorous expectations of the AP in mind, students' language proficiency will increase meaningfully and in relevant ways that ensure greater success on AP language exams or any other language proficiency examination. And then here you can see the 6 topical concepts that are represented throughout all of the units from levels 1 through 4. So this brings us to where we are today. Since 2015, we have focused on the development of assessments and development of assessments to support the curriculum. So the world language proficiency is assessed through performance. That is, by how learners apply the language that they are studying in meaningful and culturally authentic real-life situations. So since the last curriculum review process, a team of world language teachers and I have focused on the development of systemic, formative, and summative performance assessments in the 3 modes, the interpersonal, interpretive, and presentational modes of communication. And all of these assessments can be found at Data Link. It should be noted as well that the following parameters are were used in developing the assessments, and these parameters are also used by ACTFL. And the 4 parameters are function, context, content, and text type. So function basically is that the tasks are created based upon I can statements. So for example, I can introduce myself, I can say my name would be a very basic component of a level 1 unit 1 assessment. The context, once again, the created tasks are based upon real world situations. The content, the tasks are based on student-friendly topics, and the text types are tasks, if you will, that allow students to understand and discuss in non-rehearsed, and that's important, non-rehearsed ways in order to perform at an appropriate proficiency level. When students are assessed, they are assessed around a common scenario, and students are and the teachers are looking at how well the language learner is able to understand and to be understood. And in doing so, the teachers are looking at the following: language control, how accurate is the language learner's language, vocabulary, how extensive and applicable is the language learner's vocabulary, communication strategies, how does the language learner maintain communication and make meaning, and finally, cultural awareness. How is the language learner's cultural knowledge reflected in the language use? So once assessed, a language learner's performance is reported on a proficiency scale. that that student is at a novice mid or novice high or intermediate low or whatever. This brings us now to our second focus since 2015, and that's been on professional development. So the principles of professional development for 21st century language learning has shifted its focus from when you and I probably were in school, where the shift is basically where the students are learning not about the language, but they're learning to engage authentically in the language. So once again, the emphasis is on the student being an active participant in real life situations by means of authentic materials, tasks, audiences, and evidence. With that stated, in the past 5 years, professional development to support the implementation of the curriculum has fallen basically into two very broad categories, and that is what you see here, pedagogy and assessment. And once again, this has taken place through PLCs as well as systemic professional development, as well as academies that we've had over the summer. So during these sessions that focused on pedagogy, research-based methodology of language instruction was explored, and in doing so, teachers were able to build a toolbox, if you will, of strategies that they were able to use in their classrooms. And this involved professional development sessions on the use of at least 90% target language use, comprehensible input, which Maria mentioned in her session, so we're basically on the same page here, as well as student empowerment and student engagement. In the sessions that focused on assessment, teachers focused on range finding, and range finding is a norming of scores in order to ensure that the students were evaluated consistently and in alignment with the scoring rubric across the system. So we ensured that students who were getting 90s at Patterson were getting the same 90 at Poly. So once again, we were examining all of those things. So the question becomes, is the curriculum effective? How effective is the curriculum? So in this chart, we can see the AP results for the Spanish language and culture, because that's where we have our AP courses at this point. So we see them for the past 5 years, and I know immediately your eye is drawn to the Navy column. And this column indicates the number of test takers over the past 5 years. This number has remained consistent with an average about 40 students each year taking the Spanish language and cultural exam at a number of schools. What is important to note, however, is the vast majority of our students who complete 4 years of instruction using this curriculum that we currently have in place are receiving scores of 3s, 4s, and 5s as indicated with the purple, aqua, and orange columns. And these scores thus ensure that students are earning college credit. Another indicator of evidence of success is the number of students that have received the Maryland Seal of Biliteracy. And for those who may not be familiar with the Seal of Biliteracy, it's a reward from the Maryland State Department of Education that recognizes a student's high level of proficiency in speaking, reading, writing, and listening in English, as well as one more language. And to receive the Seal of Biliteracy, a student must, first of all, pass the Maryland High School Assessment for English 10 and demonstrate an intermediate proficiency level in listening, speaking, reading, and writing in one other language. This means that for our students, they have to have a minimum of a 4. So all those 3s that you just saw, they don't cut it for this. On the AP language assessment, or a minimum of a 5 or 6 on the IB assessment. So in this chart, we can see that Baltimore is currently ranking about 5th in the state after 3 years. So right now we have awarded 131 students a seal of biliteracy upon their graduation. So area of growth. So while this area of growth is not necessarily a curricular one, it's one of equity, I believe. I'm not sure if everyone is aware that if a middle school student completes 2 consecutive years of the same language with a certified world language teacher, that student will receive 1 high school credit. This practice is consistent with other counties throughout Maryland. The thought behind it is that students will enter level 2 of the target language in his or her freshman year in high school, thus increasing the chances of success on the AP exam. It also offers an opportunity for a system to further expand the AP language throughout the district. So as you can see here, we have 6 schools, 6 middle schools that have students enrolled for languages in grades 7 and 8. The schools not listed have students completing an online program like Rosetta Stone or Middlebury Interactive, and thus are not eligible for a high school credit at the middle school level. Moving forward. So looking back over the past 5 years, we're pleased with the accomplishment, but once again, there's always room for growth and future success. So in the next 5 years, the focus will be on assessment revision and the building out of a performance-based assessment bank. In addition to the assessment bank, there's also a need to improve the resource bank for instructional materials. Currently, materials are being developed to support teachers and students in order to achieve a 90% or more target language use in level 1 classrooms, but we're only in the first stages of this work. The goal is to build materials for additional levels and to ensure that the materials are comprehensive, aligned to the standards, and support teachers' ability to engage students once again in meaningful and impactful ways. Finally, with the encouragement of teachers, especially this year, project-based learning units will be refined and developed, further developed, and used as a meaningful way of engaging students. And there we have it.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I'm going to start with Commissioner Robert. Do you have any thoughts or questions?
Commissioner Faden, I don't have any questions, but I really appreciated this presentation. It was a really beautiful presentation. Thank you. But no, I do not have any questions.
I appreciate that. I'm curious to know what are the actual languages that we offer in our schools? I know that we have the varying levels. I'm assuming those levels are for specific languages. I can't hear you. You're there you go.
So to answer your question, what languages do we have? The easy way to remember it is the word scarf, okay? Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, Russian, French, and Spanish. Or I'm sorry, yes.
So scarf without
yes.
and I got you.
Okay.
I got it. I appreciate that. And then do we have a breakdown of what languages are in specific schools?
We do. And the simple answer is, with the exception of our immersion schools, the vast majority of schools have Spanish. We have a handful of schools that have French and a smaller group of schools with Chinese.
Okay. That's good to know. I would like to